Welcome to i-TUTOR IAS Academy Biology NCERT series. Today we will be discussing Chapter 14 Ecosystem. We will be discussing it in two parts. So first part will be till ecological pyramids, and from ecological pyramids it will be discussed in part 2. An ecosystem can be visualized as a functional unit of nature where living organisms interact among themselves and also with the surrounding physical environment. Ecosystem varies greatly in size, from small pond to a large forest or sea. Many ecologists regard the entire biosphere as a global ecosystem as a composite of all local ecosystem on Earth. Okay, moving on. Since the system is too much big and complex to be studied at one time, it is convenient to divide it into two basic categories. So there are two basic categories into which we can divide the complex concept of ecosystem. So ecosystem is nothing but just take a note of this. Ecosystem is nothing but the functional unit of nature where the organisms interact with themselves and also with the surrounding physical environment. This is a good definition to start with, and it's very big and complex. That's why we are dividing it into two basic categories, namely terrestrial and aquatic. So forest, grassland and deserts are some examples of terrestrial ecosystems, while pond, lake, wetland, river and estuaries are examples of aquatic ecosystem. Crop fields and an aquarium may also be considered as a man-made ecosystem. So in this chapter, we will first look at the structure of the ecosystem in order to appreciate the input, transfer of energy and then output. We will also look at the relationship like cycles, chains and webs that are created as a result of the energy flow within the system and their interrelationship. Moving on, ecosystem, the structure and function. In the previous chapter, you have looked at various components of the environment like abiotic and abiotic factors. You studied how the individual biotic and abiotic factors affect each other and their surroundings. Let us now look at how these components in a more integrated manner and see how the flow of energy take place within the components of ecosystem. Interaction of biotic and abiotic components result in a physical structure that is characteristic for each type of ecosystem. So, interaction between biotic, living and non-living components will result in a physical structure that is characteristic for each type of ecosystem. Identification and enumeration of plant and animal species of an ecosystem gives its species composition. Species composition of an ecosystem is given by identifying and enumerating the plant and animal species of an ecosystem. The vertical distribution of different species occupying different level is called stratification. So the vertical distribution of different species that is occupying different levels is known as stratification. For example, in case of forest, you see small herbs and shrubs in the lower part, then there are small trees, then there are large huge trees and their canopies. So this is a vertical distribution, first level, second level, third level. So this is called as the vertical distribution of species occupying different levels is called stratification. For example, trees occupy top vertical strata or layer of the forest. So big trees occupy top vertical strata or layer of the forest. Shrubs, this is shrubs the second part, and the herbs and grasses, small grasses and herbs that occupies the bottommost layer of the forest floor, they are at the bottom level. So they occupy the third level. The components of ecosystem are seen as a function as a unit when you consider the following aspects. 1. Productivity. 2nd. Decomposition. 3rd. Energy flow. And 4th. Nutrient cycling. So the components of an ecosystem are seen as a function are seen to function as a unit when you consider these four aspects. To understand the ethos of an aquatic ecosystem, let us take pond as an example. This is fairly a sustainable unit and rather simple example that explain how even the complex interaction that exists in the aquatic ecosystem. A pond is a shallow water body in which all the above mentioned four components of an ecosystem are well mentioned. So all these four components of an ecosystem are explained in the pond, can be explained using the pond as an aquatic ecosystem. The abiotic component is the water with all the dissolved organic and inorganic substances and the rich soil deposit at the bottom of the pond. The solar input, the cycle of temperature, day length and the other climatic conditions regulate the rate of function of the entire pond. The autotrophic components include phytoplankton, some algae and floating, submerged and marginal plants found at the edges. The consumers are represented by zooplankton, freely swimming and bottom-dwelling forms. The decomposers are the fungi, bacteria and flagellates, especially abundant in the bottom of the pond. This system performs all functions of any ecosystem and of biosphere as a whole. That is, conversion of inorganic into organic material with the help of the radiant energy of the sun by autotrophs, consumption of the autotrophs by heterotrophs, decomposition and mineralization of the dead matter to release them back for reuse by the autotrophs. So these events are repeated over and over again. This is a unidirectional flow of energy towards higher tropic levels and its dissipation and loss and it's dissipated and then loss to the environment as heat. So the components of an ecosystem are seen as a function of unit of are seen to function as a unit when we consider the following things like productivity, decomposition, energy flow and nutrient cycling. So we have explained this using pond as an example. Pond which is having both biotic and abiotic components. Biotic components being plankton, algae, floating and submerged plants and other things, and abiotic components being the soil, the water with its all nutrients and everything. So these function as a unit. So that is known as the components of the ecosystem. So now we'll discuss more details about productivity, decomposition, energy flow and nutrient cycle. Starting with productivity. A constant input of solar energy is the basic requirement for any ecosystem to function and sustain. Primary production is defined as the amount of biomass or organic matter produced per unit area over a time period by the plants during photosynthesis. So there are so many keywords that you have to keep in mind. What is primary production? Primary production is nothing but the amount of biomass or organic matter produced. So this is one important keyword in this definition, which is produced per unit area. This is second one. Second keyword, over a time period by plants during the photosynthesis. So it's during the photosynthetic process. It is expressed in terms of weight or energy. So weight is the unit that is given to weight is per gram square, and for energy it is kilocalorie per meter square. The rate of biomass production is called productivity. So what is productivity? Productivity is nothing but the rate at which the biomass is produced. It is expressed in terms of per gram square per year or kilocalorie per meter square per year to compare the productivity of different ecosystems. It can be divided into two categories. That the productivity can be divided into two: gross primary productivity and net primary productivity. So these are productivity productivity can be divided into two. That is gross primary productivity and net primary productivity. Now let's discuss in details about these two categories. Okay, sorry. Let's discuss what is gross primary productivity and what is net primary productivity. The gross primary productivity of an ecosystem is the rate of production of organic matter during photosynthesis. So it's a simple definition. What is gross primary productivity? It's nothing but the productivity of, it's a rate at which the production of organic matter during photosynthesis. A considerable amount of gross primary productivity is utilized by the plants for respiration. So the plants are producing these organic matter during photosynthesis, but it too have its energy expenditure. So that is used by a considerable amount of this productivity will be used by the plants for the respiration of the plants itself. So the gross primary productivity minus the respiratory loss is nothing but net primary productivity. So we have seen what is productivity. Productivity is nothing but the production of biomass, the rate at which the biomass is produced, and we have seen the unit of these as well. Now productivity can be divided into two categories: gross primary productivity, net primary productivity, and we have seen the definitions also. What is gross primary productivity? Is nothing but simply the productivity or the rate of production of organic matter during photosynthesis. But a more refined definition is net primary productivity, in which the respiratory loss of the plant is subtracted. So we'll get the more accurate value of productivity. So this is the definition of net primary productivity, is gross primary productivity minus the respiratory loss. The net primary productivity is the available biomass for the consumption of heterotrophs, that is herbivores and decomposers. Secondary productivity is defined as the rate of formation of new organic matter by the consumers. So the primary productivity is by the autotrophs, while the secondary productivity is by the consumers. Now let's move to energy flow. Except for the deep sea hydrothermal ecosystem, sun is the only source of energy for all ecosystems on Earth. Of the incident solar radiation, less than 50% of it is photosynthetically active radiation. We know that plants and photosynthetic and chemosynthetic bacteria, that is autotrophs, fix sun's radiant energy to make food from simple inorganic materials. Plants capture only 2 to 10% of the photosynthetically active radiation, and this small amount of energy then sustains the entire living world. So among the solar radiation, only 50% is photosynthetically active. Only 50% is photosynthetically active, and in that only 2 to 10% is of this photosynthetically active radiation is used by the autotrophs, like the plants or the chemosynthetic bacteria, and which is then used by the rest of the living organisms. So it is very important to know that to know how the solar energy is captured by the plants and how it flows through the different organisms of an ecosystem. All organisms are dependent for their food on producers, either directly or indirectly. So you find a unidirectional energy flow from sun to the producers and then to consumers. Further, ecosystems are not exempt from the second law of thermodynamics. They need a constant supply of energy to synthesize molecules they require to interact, the universal tendency towards increasing disorderliness. The green plant in ecosystem terminology called producers. So the green plants in the ecosystem terminology is known as producers. In a terrestrial ecosystem, major producers are herbaceous and woody plants. Likewise, primary producers in aquatic ecosystem are various species of phytoplankton, algae and higher plants. So, green plants in the ecosystem terminology are called as producers. Who are producers? These are the green plants in the ecosystem terminology. And in a terrestrial ecosystem, major producers are herbaceous and woody plants. And in aquatic ecosystem, the primary producers are phytoplankton, algae and higher plants. Starting from the plants or producers, food chain or rather webs are formed such that animal feeds on the plant or on another animal and in turn is food for the another. The chain or web is formed because of the interdependency. No energy that is trapped into an organism remain in it forever. The energy trapped by the producer hence is passed on to the consumer or the organism dies. The death of the organism is the beginning of the another food web or a chain known as that it is food chain. The death of the organism is the beginning of another food web or food chain known as that it is food chain. Okay, we have seen decomposition process. Now we'll see what are the factors that is affecting decomposition. Decomposition is a oxygen requiring process. So oxygen availability will affect the decomposition. Then the rate of decomposition is controlled by the chemical composition of the detritus and climatic factors. So this is second and the climatic factors are this third. Now we'll see more details about it. So in a particular climatic condition, the decomposition rate is slower if the detritus is rich in lignin and chitin, and it will be quicker if the detritus is rich in nitrogen and water soluble substances like sugar. So lignin and chitin will decrease the rate of decomposition rate, while the presence of chemicals like if the detritus is rich in nitrogen and water soluble substances, then the decomposition rate will increase. It will be quicker. And temperature and moisture are the most important climatic factors that regulate decomposition through their effects on activities of soil microbes. So soil microbes activities are affected by the temperature and moisture condition, which will in turn affect the decomposition process. Warm and moist environment favor decomposition, whereas low temperature and anaerobiosis inhibit decomposition, resulting in buildup of organic materials. So warm and moist conditions increase the decomposition rate, while the low temperature and low anaerobiosis means the low oxygen conditions, it will decrease the decomposition or it will inhibit the decomposition, resulting in buildup of organic materials. Now let's move to energy flow. Except for the deep sea hydrothermal ecosystem, sun is the only source of energy for all ecosystem on earth. Of the incident solar radiation, less than 50% of it is photosynthetically active radiation. We know that plants and photosynthetic and chemosynthetic bacteria, that is autotrophs, fix sun's radiant energy to make food from simple inorganic materials. Plants capture only 2 to 10% of the photosynthetically active radiation, and this small amount of energy then sustains the entire living world. So among the solar radiation, only 50% is photosynthetically active. Only 50% is photosynthetically active, and in that only 2 to 10% of this photosynthetically active radiation is used by the autotrophs like the plants or the chemosynthetic bacteria, and which is then used by the rest of the living organisms. So it is very important to know that to know how the solar energy is captured by the plants and how it flows through the different organisms of an ecosystem. All organisms are dependent for their food on producers, either directly or indirectly. So you find a unidirectional energy flow from sun to the producers and then to consumers. Further, ecosystems are not exempt from the second law of thermodynamics. They need a constant supply of energy to synthesize molecules they require to interact, the universal tendency towards increasing disorderliness. The green plant in ecosystem terminology called producers. So the green plants in the ecosystem terminology is known as producers. In a terrestrial ecosystem, major producers are herbaceous and woody plants. Likewise, primary producers in aquatic ecosystem are various species of phytoplankton, algae and higher plants. So, green plants in the ecosystem terminology are called as producers. Who are producers? These are the green plants in the ecosystem terminology. And in a terrestrial ecosystem, major producers are herbaceous and woody plants. And in aquatic ecosystem, the primary producers are phytoplankton, algae and higher plants. Starting from the plants or producers, food chain or rather webs are formed such that animal feeds on the plant or on another animal and in turn is food for the another. The chain or web is formed because of the interdependency. No energy that is trapped into an organism remain in it forever. The energy trapped by the producer hence is passed on to the consumer or the organism dies. The death of the organism is the beginning of the another food web or a chain known as detritus food chain. The death of the organism is the beginning of another food web or food chain known as detritus food chain. All animals depend on plants directly or indirectly for their food needs. So they are hence called consumers and also heterotrophs. So plants produce the food, that it converts the inorganic matters into organic matter using the sunlight by the process of photosynthesis. They are known as producers. Plants are known as the producers, and all animals depend on the plants either directly or indirectly for their food needs. So they are known as consumers and also heterotrophs. If they feed on the producers, the plant producers, that is the plants, then they are known as primary consumers. And if the animal eat other animals, which in turn eats the plants or they produce, then they are known as secondary consumers. So consumers can be divided into various ways. One is the primary consumers, that is they directly consume the producers. Plants are directly consumed by the producers, and these primary producers like cow, deer and etc., these primary producers are consumed by the secondary producers. So they are known as secondary producers. Likewise, you could also have tertiary consumers too. Sorry, these are secondary consumers. Likewise, you can also have tertiary consumers also. Obviously, the primary consumers will be herbivores. Some common herbivores are insects, birds and mammals in terrestrial ecosystem and mollusks in aquatic ecosystem. So just take the note of these examples. Moving on, the consumers that feed on these herbivores are carnivores, or more correctly primary carnivores. So another term for the secondary consumers are primary carnivores, that is consumers who feed on the herbivores are carnivores, more correctly the primary carnivores, though secondary consumers. Those animals that depend on primary carnivores for their food are labeled as secondary carnivores. So those who feed on the primary carnivores are known as secondary carnivores. So these primary carnivores are secondary consumers, while secondary carnivores are tertiary consumers. So just don't get confused with these words. We have seen producers, that is plants. Then we have seen consumers, And in that we have seen primary consumers are also known as herbivores, and those who feed on the herbivores are known as primary carnivores or secondary consumers. And those who feed, the organism which feed on the primary carnivores are known as secondary carnivores, and they are the tertiary, third level of consumers. First level of consumer is herbivores. Secondary consumers are primary carnivores. Tertiary consumers are secondary carnivores. So just don't get confused. A simple grazing food chain diagram is depicted below. That is, grass is eaten by a goat, and goat is in turn eaten by humans, man. So grass is the producer. Here in the food chain, it is the producer. Goat, which consumes the grass, is primary consumer, and man who consumes the goat is secondary consumer. So this the other name of primary consumer is herbivores. They are herbivores. And other name of secondary consumer is primary carnivores. So don't get confused with these terms. The detritus food chain begins with dead organic matter. It is made up of decomposers, which are heterotrophic organisms, mainly fungi and bacteria. They meet their energy and nutrient requirement by degrading dead organic matter or detritus. These are also known as saprotrophs. Sapro means to decompose. Decomposed secrete digestive enzymes. They secrete digestive enzymes that break down the dead and the waste materials into simple inorganic materials, which is consequently absorbed by them. Okay, so we have seen a grazing food chain. Now we are seeing the detritus food chain, which begins with dead organic matter. It is made up of decomposers, which are heterotrophic organism. So the dead organic matters are degraded by the heterotrophic organisms, mainly the fungi and bacteria. They release digestive enzymes, and it break down the dead and waste materials into simple inorganic materials, and they absorb it. In aquatic ecosystem, grazing food chain is the main conduit of energy transfer. Against this, in the terrestrial ecosystem, a much larger fraction of energy flows through detritus food chain than the grazing food chain. So detritus food chain may be connected with the grazing food chain at some levels. Some of the organisms of the detritus food chain are prey to grazing food chain animals. And in a natural ecosystem, some animals like cockroaches, crows, etc. are omnivores. These natural interconnections of food chains make it a food web. For food web is there are certain interconnections within the food chain that lead to formation of a food web. Moving on, organisms occupy a place in the natural surroundings or in a community according to their feeding relationship with other organisms. Based on the source of nutrition or food, the organism occupy a specific place in the food chain that is known as a trophic level. Producers being the first trophic level, herbivores being the primary consumer to the second, and carnivores, that is secondary consumer, to the third. So this is a definition of what is a trophic level. Trophic level is nothing but based on their nutrition or food, the organism occupy specific place in the food chain, and that specific place is known as the trophic level. So primary producers, they occupy the first trophic level, and primary consumers, they occupy the second trophic level. Secondary consumers, that is the carnivores, they occupy the third trophic level, and the tertiary consumers, that is the top predator or top carnivore, or we can say the secondary carnivores. Carnivores, they occupy the fourth trophic levels and goes on. So we'll see the examples. The primary producers being examples are phytoplankton, grass, trees, etc. Primary consumers, grasshopper, cow, zooplankton, etc. Secondary consumers, birds, fishes, voles, etc. Tertiary consumers, man, lion. These are top carnivores. So this is the diagrammatic representation of trophic levels in an ecosystem. Moving on, the amount of energy decreases at successive trophic levels. When the organism dies, it is converted into detritus or dead biomass that serves as energy source for decomposers. Organisms at each trophic level depend on those at the lower trophic level for their energy demands. Each trophic level has a certain mass of living biomaterial at a particular time called as standing crop. So this is the definition. What is standing crop? It is the certain biomass of living material that is present at a particular time at in each trophic level, that is standing crop. The standing crop is measured as the mass of living organism, that is biomass, or the number in a unit area. So the standard crop can be measured in mass or in terms of number in a unit area. The biomass of a species is expressed in terms of fresh or dry weight. Measurement of biomass in terms of dry weight is more accurate. This is because the water quantity differs. So in case of dry weight, the interference of that parameter won't be there. The number of trophic levels in a grazing food chain is restricted as transfer of energy follows the 10% law. Only 10% of the energy is transferred to each trophic level from the lower trophic level. In nature, it is possible to have so many levels like producer, herbivore, primary carnivore, secondary carnivore, in the grazing food chain, etc. So from the each, so this is a 10% low as one move from the lower trophic level, that is from producer to top carnivores, the only 10% of the energy is transferred to each trophic level. Only 10% of the energy is transferred to each trophic level. So in nature, it is possible to have many levels. So like producer, herbivore, primary carnivore, secondary carnivore, etc. in the grazing food chain, as well as detritus food chain. So this is a energy flow diagram that is showing the flow of energy from one trophic level to another. From sun, the energy is transferred to the plants, and from the plants it is transferred to other organism, and during the transfer to each level only 10% is transmitted. Only 10% of the energy is transmitted. Rest is disseminated. Some is disseminated at heat, other is lost as respiratory loss, etc. So from plants to the plant eating, the primary trophic level, that is primary consumers, only 10% is transport, and from the primary consumers to the secondary consumers, that is carnivores, only 10% is transmitted, and so on. So this is all for the discussion of part 1 of chapter 14. The rest will be discussed in part 2. Thank you for watching. For more related contents, do like, share and subscribe.